Hey guys, it's me again. Welcome back to Screen Reel. Hopefully, your go to source for all things movies and TV. Once again, I'm your host. My name is Ever Nolasco, and we're about to embark on the coolest journey through the world of entertainment. This episode, I talk about a couple of things, and honestly, look, I know I said this last time, but I do think this might be the best episode of Screen Reel yet. Again, I feel like I'm getting better at this the more I do it. So for me, it just feels good to be able to see improvement. Now I wish I was getting more views. The YouTube version, if you're listening to this on YouTube, which I don't think anybody's listening to this on YouTube because the last episode only got one view. Yeah, only one view. That sucks. We need to bump those numbers up. Look, a couple of things off the top that I do want to say real quick. I did go watch Knock at the Cabin a couple of days ago. Now, I thought it was really good. This is the third movie that I've seen this year, not counting The Whale because The Whale was a 2022 film. So this is the third 2023 film. I saw Megan, I saw A Man Called Otto. Oh no, I saw Missing. So this is the fourth Knock at the Cabin. I think this is the best movie of the year so far that I've seen. Again, I've only seen four. We're still only in February, so it doesn't really say much. But yeah, I think it's the best movie. Look, I mean, right off the bat, like the movie sort of gets going right off the bat. The first scene, I'm not gonna get into any spoilers, but I'm just gonna basically say, like, the first scene, right from the first scene, there's some tension, right? Like, cause we see the shot in the trailer, but Dave Bautista is talking to the little girl. One thing I noticed, and I really like how M. Night Shyamalan did this, is like the the scene starts and the camera shots are like wide, so we see both of them. Even the single shots of them are wide, so we see their entire like face and shoulders and like up to their chest. But then as the scene goes on, the camera shots sort of push in more. So as we cut back and forth between the little girl and Dave Bautista, his character is Leonard, between the little girl and Leonard, the shots get closer and closer to their face to the point where their entire face is taking up the entire screen. And it's just like, it's sort of a subconscious thing because you sort of feel uncomfortable in this scene because you don't know what's going to happen next. And those camera shots getting closer and just pushing more on the actor's face is sort of, the conversation gets a bit more personal. So getting closer to them is sort of a reflection of that in a subconscious in like a visual way. So I really like that. So right off the bat, I was a huge fan of it. I thought the movie was really good. I mean, I thought the first half was better than the second half because, how do I say this without spoiling anything? There is a certain ensemble of characters that the group starts to get smaller as the movie goes on. And then for me, as the group, because to me, what really caught my attention was the dynamic of that ensemble, that particular group of people. And then seeing them interact with each other and seeing them interact with the family and we see this in the trailer, but the family that they take over their cabin or they break in. They don't take over it, but they break in. And then seeing this group of people interact with each other and everything, I thought was super interesting. But then as the movie goes along, their numbers dwindle, so we see less, obviously, of their interactions. And then at that point, I was like, I still thought the movie was good, but I just would have liked to have seen more of the group as a group, if that makes sense. To me, the standout was Dave Bautista. I think he has really become, like, I'll actually say, like, he's a pretty good actor. He's a really good actor, even. He is one of the wrestler turned actors. Like, the other ones are Dwayne The Rock Johnson and John Cena. Like, they're the main three, and I think Dave Bautista is probably the best actor out of all of them. I mean, I think the other two, I think The Rock and John Cena are still really good at what they do, but I think just Dave Bautista does it best, if that makes sense. Like, his character here is way different than his character in Glass Onion, which was way different than his character in Dune, which is way different than his character in Guardians of the Galaxy. So he really has a range. Like, he really has good range as an actor. So I really liked seeing him there. And there was a lot of, I don't want to say twists, but like there's things that I didn't expect. I'm not really going to get much into it, but there's a certain, I guess, concept that's introduced in the trailer that I didn't think was actually going to happen in the movie. I thought the group of people were just crazy. And you'll know what I'm talking about if you actually saw the movie. But yeah, overall, I would give the movie a solid 8 out of 10. And then the other thing I wanted to say off the top also was just real quick, because this is kind of old news at this point, but James Gunn dropped his DC slate like last week. And there are some things there that I did expect and some things that were surprises. So the things that I did expect was the Superman movie. We got a title for Superman Legacy. We got a release date, July 11, 2025. I wish it was coming out next year, but look, if you're going to make it good, you need all the time in the world. But then we also got Batman, the Brave and the Bold, which we're going to say Batman and Robin again, which we haven't seen since 1997's Batman and Robin, which completely killed the Batman franchise. Then we got The Authority, which I don't know shit about them, but they're apparently kind of like a discount Justice League. Like, they're a team of heroes, but they're not all good. They're sort of like anti-heroes. I guess it's kind of like the Suicide Squad, but it's more of the Justice League than a Suicide Squad, you know? So I don't know shit about them, but I'm very excited to see how the dynamic between them and the Justice League is going to be. We didn't get any Justice League announcement, but he did say this was only the first half of the first chapter called Gods and Monsters, which I like how they're doing that, where Marvel just has phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. They actually give names. So chapter 1, Gods and Monsters. I think that's really cool. But we're also getting a Booster Gold TV series, which I'm excited as fuck for that. We're getting the Green Lantern TV show with Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart, which they said it was going to be like a mystery kind of detective type of show. So I'm really hyped for that. But basically, the first movie James Gunn said that's actually launching this new DCU is Superman Legacy. So that's where my focus is on at this point, and I'm just ready for that. But anyways, let's jump into this episode of Screen Reel. Again, I think this is the best one yet. I talk about reboots and remakes. I like always, I like to talk about the movies that pertain to the topic. So I do go through some examples of good reboots and bad reboots and just my reasons why and everything. So yeah, stick around. And without further ado, sit back, relax, get comfortable, and get ready for your weekly dose of Screen Reel. Check mic 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Okay, let's jump into this. There have been a lot of reboots and remakes, and you've probably heard a lot of people complain about how Hollywood doesn't make any more original movies and that all they do is churn out remakes and reboots and sequels. Interestingly enough, if you actually were to sit down and go through every movie release that comes out, you would see that the majority of them actually are original movies. The problem, though, that comes with that is because they are original movies, it is a higher risk to make them, as opposed to making a sequel to a well-known IP or rebooting a well-known IP. So a lot of these original films sort of get swept under the rug by general audiences just because, maybe the marketing budgets on those films are smaller than obviously like the bigger franchises. But I don't know. I find it interesting that a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, I think in everything there's a vocal minority. Maybe it's the majority. I don't think a lot of people care, really. If you look at certain parts of the internet, you'll find people complaining about anything. But just from a personal point of view, I don't find remakes and reboots to be a bad thing. As long as like if the franchise is working, then there's no need to reboot. You know, like there comes a point where if we're gonna see another movie about a specific character or a specific franchise, there does come a certain point where, you know, if the movies aren't delivering on quality and from a business point of view, if they're not delivering financially, then usually it means it's time to take a break or it's time to just start from scratch and reboot. So so what makes a good reboot and what makes a bad reboot? I think there are a couple of things. I mean, here are just a couple of the ones that I have written down. Number 1, a good reboot has something different to say, and it doesn't rehash the same exact thing from the original. Number 2, while it has something different to say, it still keeps the spirit of the original movie. And number 3, and this isn't necessarily a requirement for a reboot to be good, but it's nice to have, it improves on the original. Now, a reboot doesn't have to be better than the original in order for it to be good. I think those are two separate things. If it's better, then that's awesome. If it's not as good as the original, but it's still a solid movie, then that's good too, because now we have two good movies. Now, what makes a bad reboot? This is what I wrote down here. It's a copy and paste version of the original. This is basically the opposite of the first point for what makes a good reboot. But if it's just doing the same thing as the first one, then why are we even doing it at all? Right? Number 2 on what makes a bad reboot, I got it makes you feel like you could have lived without it. You know, if a studio or a director or any creative goes through the entire process of remaking a movie, but it just feels like a waste of time, then I feel like that makes a bad reboot. Like, let me reword that. I feel like that came out shitty. If you come out of the reboot and you're like, why did this happen? Why did we even need this? I mean, it does go hand in hand with the first one, right? Because if it's a copy and paste of the original, then it's going to make you feel like, I mean, why did we need this? Why did we make this? Why do we have this? We already have the first one and you just made the same exact thing. And maybe it's not even the same exact shot for shot, but if the general story is the same, then why do it? Number 3, the third bullet point that I have here for what makes a reboot bad, and this is less to do with the movie itself and more about external forces. So I have, it's only being made to keep right. So there have been a couple examples in the past, especially, I mean, at least the ones that I know are more comic book IP based. But for example, you know, when Fox made it back in 2015, I believe, so 8 years ago, that's crazy. 2015 was 8 years ago. But back in 2015, Fox made a Fantastic Four reboot directed by Josh Trank. Now, there was a lot of drama behind the scenes on that. Apparently, Josh Trank, the director, repeatedly came to the set drunk and he would rage a lot on set. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what's real. I don't know what's not real. But that is what is out there. The movie came out and it wasn't good. But interestingly enough, before that 2015 Fantastic Four movie came out, the last movie, the Fantastic Four movie before that one was in 2007, Fantastic Four: Rise of the Silver Surfer. So it had been like 8 years. And with the deal that Marvel, like when Marvel sold those characters to Fox, there was a certain clause in the contract that if they don't use the characters within a certain amount of time, I don't know what the number is, but just say for argument's sake, like if the time limit was like 5 years, so from 2007, if they hadn't started production on another Fantastic Four movie in 2012, then the rights would go back to Marvel. Now, again, those aren't real numbers. I don't know what the actual number of years is, but yeah, there was a time limit there. If they didn't go into production on a new Fantastic Four movie before this time limit ended, then Marvel would get the rights back to the Fantastic Four. So really, Fox only made that 2015 Fantastic Four movie because they were on a time crunch and they wanted to keep those rights. So yeah, and then the consequence of that movie, I mean, the movie flopped. The movie wasn't great, and I don't know. In a way, it felt unneeded. You know, we could have lived without it, but the cast of that movie was really good, though. We had Miles Teller as Mr. Fantastic. You know, he was in Whiplash. He was in Top Gun, Maverick. We had Michael B. Jordan. Obviously, we know him as Killmonger, as Adonis Creed. Is it Adonis Creed? I actually haven't watched the Creed movies in a while. You know, he's in Creed. He's the leading role in Creed. And so he seemed to bounce back. I think the guy that played the Thing, I haven't really seen him in much. So, yeah. Anyways, I have a fourth bullet point here for what makes a reboot bad. And it says, it's made to start a cinematic universe instead of focusing on making a good movie. So an example of this, for example, is... yeah, I don't know why I said it that way, but an example of this is the 2017 movie, The Mummy, starring Tom Cruise. I didn't watch this movie because I didn't think it looked all that good, but also because I was in high school when the movie came out and I was broke. So even if I wanted to go watch it, I couldn't have gone watch it. And then, you know, the movie came out. It did terribly at the box office. It got terrible critic score. So I don't know why I would go out of my way to watch it if it's not a good movie. You know, time is the most valuable asset, and I would rather spend it watching something that I do like as opposed to watching something that I might not like. So yeah, but the story of that is that was a reboot as well. It was a remake of the original Mummy movies starring Brendan Fraser, who, again, as I talked last week, I saw The Whale. Brendan Fraser is awesome in that movie, and he deserves that acting nomination. But anyways, The Mummy 2017, starring Tom Cruise, that was supposed to be a launching point of a quote-unquote monsters cinematic universe. It was supposed to be called like the Dark Universe or something like that. The Dark Monsters universe, which basically that includes like the Mummy, it includes the Invisible Man, I think Dracula, what else? What other monster? I think Frankenstein's monster as well is part of that. So they were going to make like a whole cinematic universe with all these monsters, and it's going to be like a Marvel MCU type thing. I don't know. I mean, the only reason that movie was made, that movie was literally going to set up this dark universe, this like interconnected universe with all these universal monsters. And they even got the casts of the movies that were supposed to come. Like, I think Johnny Depp was supposed to play like the Invisible Man or something like that. But Johnny Depp was in it. Russell Crowe was in this movie, The Mummy 2017, with Tom Cruise. So they got like all these actors. I don't remember who else was supposed to be there, but like they got all these actors that were going to be in these upcoming future movies that hadn't started filming yet or anything. The Mummy hadn't even come out yet. So we didn't even know if The Mummy was good. But they put all of their chips into this. And basically they got like, it was like 10 actors that were supposed to be part of the upcoming movies and that were all going to be leading this monsters universe. And they did a whole photo shoot with them, and they were like, yo, the dark universe is coming and blah, 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 blah. And then The Mummy came out and it flopped hard, and then they canceled the entire thing. So they took like this whole photo shoot. I don't know. I'm guessing it was supposed to be hype or something, but it sort of fell flat and it blew up in their face. But yeah, I mean, they were just focused on making this cinematic universe instead of just focusing on making The Mummy a good movie. They made The Mummy, but they weren't focused on The Mummy. They were focused on, oh, this is going to start an entire universe. Let's get let's get the entire cast of these upcoming movies. Let's get the photo shoot. Let's do this. Let's do that. And they sort of lost sight as to, I don't know, they should have kept their eye on the ball, if that makes sense. So yeah, I've been talking a lot of negative for the past couple of minutes, you know, with The Mummy. So anyways, I do have a couple of examples of good reboots and bad reboots. Now, I just talked about Fantastic Four and The Mummy. There are two more examples of bad reboots. I didn't really format it this way. I was going to talk about the good ones first, and then go into the bad ones. But since I'm already on the bad ones, I'll just continue with the bad ones. So, Fantastic Four and The Mummy. I got those down. These other two movies that I'm about to name as examples as for bad reboots, I actually like these movies. I think they're actual good movies. So, for me, what qualifies a movie being a bad reboot doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad movie. For example, The Amazing Spider-Man, the first Amazing Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield. I really like that movie. And that movie came out in 2012. It was supposed to be a relaunch of the Spider-Man franchise after the Tobey Maguire, Sam Raimi trilogy got canceled by Sony. Now, I was like 10 when the news came out that Spider-Man 4 was canceled, and I was so pissed. I was not looking forward to The Amazing Spider-Man. I did not give a shit about anything else. I just wanted Spider-Man 4, and I'm still salty about it to this day. But The Amazing Spider-Man came out in 2012. I was older. I was 13. I was a bit more mature at that point, 13 compared to 10. And the movie came out, and I was excited. I thought the trailers looked cool, and it was really good. It was really good. But it basically told the exact same story as the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. Like, we sort of go beat for beat, right? Like, we take these moments from the original Spider-Man movie and then we sort of do them just a little bit differently, but it's the same exact thing. So, for example, we have in the first Spider-Man with Tobey Maguire, Peter Parker is on a field trip with his class, and he gets bit by a spider while he's there at this, what is it, like a museum or something? And in The Amazing Spider-Man, Andrew Garfield sneaks into Oscorp, and he gets bit by a spider there in the spider exhibit in the back rooms. So we get the origin again. And then in the original Spider-Man, we get a scene where Tobey Maguire gets into a fight with Flash, and he's like dodging all his moves, and he basically ends up beating him and embarrasses him in front of the entire school. And then in The Amazing Spider-Man, we get the scene with the basketball where Andrew Garfield is like playing around with Flash, and he's like pretending to give him the basketball. He embarrassed Flash Gordon during that scene. And then we got the, with great power comes great responsibility scene. And then, Peter tells Uncle Ben that he's not his dad to stop pretending to be. So he gets into a fight, and then he leaves on bad terms. And then the next time he sees Uncle Ben, he's shot and he's basically dead. Then in The Amazing Spider-Man, we sort of got the same thing. Peter storms out. Uncle Ben says, "Oh, if you have these powers," or like he didn't know Peter had powers, but he said basically the great power comes great responsibility. Like, oh, if you could do those things, you have a moral obligation to do those things, or something like that. And then Peter storms out. They leave on bad terms, and then the next time he sees Uncle Ben, he got shot by the guy. Oh, again, in Tobey Maguire's version, he let the guy at the wrestling rink that stole that money. He let the guy leave. And that's the same guy that shot Uncle Ben. And then in the same thing for The Amazing Spider-Man, when Peter Parker is buying milk at the convenience store, the guy in front of him steals the money. He leaves, and he could stop him, but he doesn't because of his pride. And then that's the same guy that shoots Uncle Ben. So you see the pattern here. Like, we sort of got the same exact story. Like, yeah, it was told a little differently, but it was the same exact story. So while I really like The Amazing Spider-Man, it was basically the same exact story. In some ways, even though I think The Amazing Spider-Man 2 is a bad movie and is worse than the first Amazing Spider-Man, I, in some ways, prefer The Amazing Spider-Man 2 because it doesn't go and tell the same exact origin story again. And we get a new story. Like, we get past that origin story. Like, we don't need to see that again. We already saw it. I don't know. It's just my point of view. And then the other example of a bad reboot, again, this is a movie that I actually like, is the 2019 The Lion King, which, look, again, I really like it. I remember seeing it, and that first scene with the circle of life, it gave me as much chills as the original animated version from 1994. But the movie is pretty much a shot-for-shot remake of the 1994 movie. It's pretty much the same exact movie, just told in a different medium. And people call it the live-action Lion King, but it's still an animated movie because the lions are still CGI. They're computer generated. There's only one shot that's actually live action in the entire movie, and it's the first shot of the sun rising up. So even this qualifies as an animated movie, but it looks so photorealistic. And some people complain that it looks too photorealistic, that it looks boring, that there's no emotions on the lines. I did not mind it at all, but yeah, it's pretty much the same movie. If I had a choice, I would probably watch the original animated movie. I don't know, just because nostalgic reasons, I guess. But look, I still think it's a good movie. I just think if they were going to do it, they should have done something differently. But then you get into the entire thing. Like, it's kind of like a lose-lose situation, because the way they did it, we get people complaining about, and I'm not complaining about it. Like, I'm fine with the movie. Like I said, I like it. But we get people complaining about, like, oh, it's the same exact thing. Why even make it? Disney ran out of ideas. But then if Disney would have went ahead and made this 2019 movie and then changed some things from it and changed some plot details or whatever, maybe change the ending, change how Mufasa died or whatever, people would have complained about how, oh, why are you ruining my childhood? That's not how it was in the original. Boycott The Lion King. I don't know. I mean, people just love to complain about everything. So look, this is the way they did it, but even if they would have changed the plot and created something new but similar, I would have been fine with that too. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just a movie, and if you don't like it, you still have the 1994 movie. So I don't see why people get mad at shit like this when there's really no point, because if the reboot sucks, you still have the original, right? It's kind of the same thing that it's the same vibe that I'm getting off of the whole Velma thing. And I did watch the first episode. I thought it was pretty good. I never really went back to watch it again, but I would watch it. You know, maybe on a rainy day when I'm closed in and I have nothing else to do, maybe I'll watch it again. I mean, I think it was a pretty good first episode, but a lot of people are complaining about how, like, they should cancel the show, how it's ruining their childhood and blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, dude, this is just a new iteration, a new version. They're telling a different story in the Scooby-Doo world and with the characters, and sure, the characters act a little differently than they used to, but that's completely fine. And if you don't like it, then don't watch it. Then don't go in those comment sections and complain about it. Go watch the original. If you're so passionate about it, go watch the original cartoon. I still think the best version of Scooby-Doo is the 2 live action from the early 2000s with Freddie Prinze Jr., Sarah Michelle Gellar, like, you know, them. Like, I don't know. I just don't get it. I don't get the internet sometimes. I don't get people sometimes. It's just people in general, and I don't know, man. But anyways, let's move off of the negativity. Let's move off of the bad examples, and let's move over to movies that I can appreciate. And I have a lot of things to say about this stuff. So the first movie that came to my head when I thought of a good example of a remake / reboot was last year's The Batman, 2022's The Batman. And I said this last time, and I think The Batman might be my favorite movie of 2022. I say I think because I don't know if The Batman is my favorite movie of 2022 or Everything Everywhere All at Once is my favorite movie of 2022. But for right now, I'll just say The Batman. I really like that movie. And it's not my favorite Batman movie. The Dark Knight is still way, way, way better. I think that's like the pinnacle, the peak of superhero film. And I think I like Batman Begins more than The Batman. But I do like it more than The Dark Knight Rises. But anyways, The Batman to me is a good example of a remake, because the previous version was the Ben Affleck Batman from Batman vs. Superman. He was in the first Suicide Squad for a bit, and then he was in both versions of Justice League. And I would say even the Ben Affleck version is a good example of a good reboot, even though I'm not a huge fan of the Batman, of Ben Affleck's Batman. I do like him as Bruce Wayne, but I think Zack Snyder made some choices with the Batman side of the character that I didn't like. But it was way different than the previous iteration, which was the Christopher Nolan Batman. So when we saw Ben Affleck's Batman, it was way different than the Christian Bale Batman. It had something different to say. It was an older Batman in his like mid 40s. He'd been through all the shit. We didn't see an origin story. I mean, we did see the Waynes die again, but it was still different. It had something different to say. And then coming off of the Ben Affleck version to the Robert Pattinson Batman, again, it was a completely different version. It was, again, more grounded, and it was more of a detective story than any other Batman movie. We've seen Batman do some detective work in the previous movies, in the Ben Affleck and the Christopher Nolan, but we never saw an entire movie where he's basically being a detective. He's actually solving mysteries. And I mean, the main villain was the Riddler, so I'm pretty sure if we had the Riddler as a villain in any of the previous Batman movies, they would have done something more like that. Although we did get the Riddler in, I think it was in Batman Forever. Jim Carrey played him, so maybe I take that back. But yeah, the Riddler was a villain. It was more of a detective story than like an action movie. Like there was not a lot of fight scenes, right? Like we got the final battle at the very, very end where he's fighting the Riddler's goons. And then we got, I mean, that's the only, I think, oh, and then we got a couple of fight scenes at the Iceberg Lounge. And then we got the Batmobile chase. But like for all intents and purposes, it was mainly a detective story, him solving these riddles, which is something we'd never seen. And again, it didn't retell the whole origin story. Like we know where Batman comes from, we know what his origin is. We don't need to see that shit again. But then the other thing is like it was a different version of the character. Like Bruce Wayne wasn't this like playboy in the public eye. He was basically this hermit emo. He was almost like just completely depressed. Like even in my favorite movie version of Batman, which is the Christian Bale one, we never saw him being depressed. You know, the Robert Pattinson version like did not clean up well. He had that long weird hair. So to me, I really like that. And it's like if you're gonna retell the Batman story again, then do it differently. You know, bring some new aspect to it. So I really liked how they did that. And then for the first time in any Batman movie that we've ever seen, at least for me, again, this is my opinion, we really saw the way Batman puts fear into criminals' hearts. Like that entire 5-minute monologue sequence at the beginning of the movie where, you know, he says the light is, or the bat signal isn't just a call, it's a warning. And we see like the criminals of the city, like they're looking at these dark, like shadowy places, and they don't know if maybe Batman is there waiting for them, like, or waiting to attack, and then they just run. Like he doesn't have to be there in order to put fear in their hearts. So I think they captured that perfectly. And then staying on the topic of Batman Begins, because that movie really reimagined Batman while also again keeping it faithful to the comics. The previous movies were a little more goofy, especially Batman and Robin, which was the movie right before Batman Begins. So Batman and Robin came out in 1997 and Batman Begins came out in 2005. So there was an 8-year gap where we didn't get any Batman. And I mean, I wasn't around when Batman and Robin came out, but apparently Batman and Robin almost killed the entire superhero genre in film because it was just that bad. And I've never seen it, but I've seen reviews, I've seen a lot of clips. It's very goofy, and I think, again, I've never seen it, and I don't think I ever want to watch it, but it is very goofy. I just feel like if it was intended for like 3-year-olds, then maybe we can justify its existence. But if it was intended for adults and everything, then yeah, I don't know what they were thinking with that movie. And then, you know, Christopher Nolan came along after he directed Memento, The Prestige. So he proved himself to be an actual really good director. Warner Brothers let him take a crack at Batman. I feel like they had nothing to lose at that point. And then he completely changed the entire tone of Batman. Make it as realistic as possible. Make it as dark as possible. Make it as serious as possible. And it was a good reboot because it improved on everything that came before it. I think when it came out, it was the best Batman movie ever made. So yeah, those are my thoughts on why Batman Begins is, and then like in juxtaposition to, you know, The Mummy, like Batman Begins was made and they were like when Christopher Nolan was making Batman Begins, like he, in the back of his mind, he would think about like, hey, maybe I'll make a sequel, but like I'm not thinking about making a sequel. I'm just focused on making this movie as best as I possibly can. Because even the next movie he made after that was The Prestige. So he wasn't even thinking about like sequels and stuff. He was just like, I'm gonna make this movie and then I'm gonna make my next movie. And then obviously that movie was a success, and Warner Brothers asked him, "Hey, can you make another one?" And yeah, I mean, Christopher Nolan only makes movies if he has a story to tell. But anyways, I'll just stop here before I start going on about how much I love Christopher Nolan. So the third movie, Man of Steel. I know a lot of people don't like this movie. I don't know. I've never felt like I had to defend liking Man of Steel, but there are a couple people I know that don't like it, but it's fine. I mean, everything is subjective. You know, I may like something that you don't like and vice versa, and that's completely fine. But Man of Steel isn't a good reboot just because I think it's one of the best movies ever made, best comic book movies ever made. It's a good reboot because it gave us a different version of Superman, and it asked questions that no Superman movie before it asked. So there are scenes in Man of Steel, for example, like when young, like teenager Clark saves his classmates from the bus when it goes off the rails and it goes into the water. And then we have the scene with him and Jonathan Kent where Jonathan Kent is like, "Hey, we talked about this. Like, we got to keep your powers under wraps. Like, we don't know how the world's going to react." And Clark is like, "I mean, what did you expect me to do? Just let them die?" And Jonathan is like, "Maybe." I mean, I'm getting chills just thinking about it, but like, it was completely like scenes like that are completely different than everything we got beforehand. Because in previous iterations of Superman, like from the original 1978 Christopher Reeve Superman the movie, and we got the Dean Cain, Lois and Clark show. We got Smallville, even though that wasn't really Superman, but it's basically Superman. We got Superman Returns with Brandon Routh. Like, I would say they were more lighthearted. Like, Smallville has a lot of dark episodes about it. Like, the Lex Smith episode I thought was really good. A lot of the Lionel and Lex scenes are dark. Like, I really like how the scenes between Lex Luthor and his father Lionel, they're shot like in a dark blue like hue, like a literal like dark blue color palette. And then when we get scenes with Clark and his parents, there's like sunshine and everything is bright and yellow. And we see the juxtaposition between these two characters. And so like we get a lot of hold up. I mean, this isn't a Smallville talk. Like, you know what? I'm gonna stop right here in this conversation because I can go for hours talking about Smallville. But my main point is that like there was just more optimism and it was more easily digestible those Superman stories that we got in the past. And then when Man of Steel came out, it really, for a remake of Superman, it really created, I don't want to say a new character, but it was just a very different version, right? Like we got a deeper mythology of Krypton, for example. We like the first 20 minutes of the movie are all on Krypton and Jor-El and Zod. And again, I don't think that was done in any Superman, at least live action media before that. Like we actually got to see the world that Kal-El comes from and the language and the technology and all that stuff and the culture basically kind of. And it was a darker movie, and that did turn a lot of people off because Superman is supposed to be optimistic. And I like Man of Steel because the story warrants the darker, more serious tone. The story is about this man who is just discovering who he is and that he is sent from this completely distant planet. And he was sent here for a reason. Like it wasn't by an accident, but he doesn't know what that reason is. And he's struggling with like, why am I here? Like, do I have an obligation of like being a leader to these people of Earth, or should I not interfere with anything? And just to loop back to that scene with Jonathan and Clark where he's like, I don't know, I mean, maybe you should have let him die, but like if you reveal your powers to the world, it's gonna affect everything, religion, politics. I don't know, I mean, I could go on and on about Man of Steel, but I think that was a really good remake. And again, it didn't just rehash the same exact thing again. It sort of took the same origin story of Superman, but it just went deeper into it. And it was just told in a much different and refreshing way, at least for me. But let's get off DC for a second and let me talk about Bumblebee. Bumblebee came out in 2018, and it was a reboot of the Transformers franchise. Now, the previous Transformers movies, I think there was like 5 or 6. I only watched the first 2, Transformers and Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen. I didn't see anything after that. So, but from what I like, a lot of the Rotten Tomato scores on that are not good. But the movies kept making like over $1 billion. So the general audience liked them up to a certain extent, because that last one made like 600 or 700 million dollars, so it really underperformed. So they had to reboot, and they came out with Bumblebee in 2018. And in my opinion, I only saw the first 2 Transformers, but this was the best Transformers movie that I had seen up to that point. And now we're getting a sequel, Transformers: Rise of the Beasts, which I'm excited for that because that movie looks dope. But Bumblebee in 2018, I thought the trailers for the movie, like leading up to it, I thought the trailers were really good. So my expectations were a little high, even though I didn't watch any of the previous Transformers movies. And then when I finally did see the movie, dude, the movie is really good. And the previous Transformers movies were more about like these big, like world-ending events and all that. And then we get to Bumblebee, and it was just more of a grounded and personal story. It was a lot more grounded. Now, we did get somewhat of the same, almost beat for beat things as the first Transformers movie. So the first Transformers, we got Shia LaBeouf. He buys this car, and the car is a robot, and then we get all these scenes where he is like kind of scared of the car and everything, and it's like surprising. And then we sort of get the same thing here. Haley Steinfeld plays the main character, which I don't even remember what the main character's name is, but and then she buys this car, and the car's a robot, and there are scenes where she's scared, blah, 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 and then they get to know each other, and they form a bond. So that's kind of the same thing as the first Transformers movie, but, just told in just a better plot, if that makes sense. And then just better characters, too, because I really care about the characters. And I think Haley Steinfeld is really good in it, and I think she's really good as Kate Bishop, too. And if they do a Young Avengers, I think she should be the leader of the Young Avengers. I mean, look, I just like seeing Haley Steinfeld. I think she's really cool. That's all I'll say. But yeah, look, Bumblebee improved in every way from the original Transformers movies, and it didn't make a lot of money. I think it only made like 400 million, like between 400 and 500 million dollars. So it didn't make a lot of money, but I don't think the studio was expecting a lot because, again, I think the budget was a lot smaller than the previous Transformers movies. And, after the terrible reception of the last few Transformers before Bumblebee, I don't think they were expecting to get a huge audience because the audience sort of fell off of it. But it was a good start. It was a really good start. Yeah, I mean, look, those are just my general thoughts on reboots and movies. And yeah. All right, guys, that's a wrap for this episode of Screen Reel. I really hope you enjoyed my thoughts and opinions. You may think differently on a lot of the things that I said, but that's fine. We all live in the same world, and movies aren't the most important thing, but they're a good source of entertainment. Look, follow the podcast on Instagram at Screen Reel Podcast. You can also, if you want a video version of it, we have one on YouTube. It's just under the name Ever Nolasco. And I have a link in the bio on Instagram, so everything is there to get you what you want. And hit that follow button to get updates on the podcast, on the show. Just a quick sneak preview for next week. Next week, I'm going to be talking about the 2 Ant-Man movies, Ant-Man and Ant-Man and the Wasp, just leading up to Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which comes out the week after that, that's what I'll be talking about that week. So yeah, look, don't forget to tune in next week for that. And as always, thank you so much for listening and watching and supporting the podcast. Until next time, I'm Ever Nolasco, and this is Screen Reel.